Hello, I'm Chuck Wolf, Chief Executive for Charles J. Wolf Associates, LLC. As a motivational speaker and a leadership consultant and executive coach and trainer, I often work with very successful people and their companies. Since many can't afford a professional, I volunteer to host a radio talk show called The Emotion Roadmap, Take the Wheel and Control How You Feel, on a nonprofit community radio station in Bridgeport, Connecticut, WPKN. My reason for doing the show is to share with as many people as possible this wonderful process for helping people manage their own emotions and their relationships with others. My goal is for everyone listening to learn to use the Emotion Roadmap to make life better. As you listen to me, help others, I hope you are also learning. As a Simsbury resident, I'm delighted to be able to make the show available through Simsbury TV. To learn more, go to my website, www.emotionroadmap.com. Thank you for listening and watching.
And this is Chuck Wolf, and you're listening to the Emotion Roadmap, Take the Wheel and Control How You Feel. And if you want to feel really great about yourself, then continue with the donations to WPKN. You're listening to a radio station that's known for its uniqueness, its innovation. It's got programmers that really care, like Carl Frano, dedicate themselves to giving you a great show with a lot of research and homework on, so you know what you're listening to, you know where the ideas came from for the songs, you know where the writers of the songs the writers of the songs came from. You have a history that you don't get anywhere else. And then the other people that I follow, I Massage, it's great. It's just another whole different opportunity to listen to reggae music. It's a real pleasure to coming in the first and second Wednesdays of each week and to follow these guys. I just want to tell you that sometimes that you want to do something that makes you feel good, better than maybe you're feeling right now. And one of the ways you do that is you do that by volunteering in some way. Maybe you can volunteer your time or your money to WPKN. And I'm just going to say this once and then I'm not going to talk about it again. But if you like the shows you're listening to, whether it's the Community Strip and my show, The Emotion Roadmap, Take the Wheel and Control How You Feel, or you love listening to all the different programmers on PKN, give us a call at 203-384-9756. And now on to my show. I've got about an hour with you, and today I want to talk about a couple of topics, but I also want to allow anybody who's been waiting for me to come in to give me a call at 203-336-9756. 203-336-9756. Those of you who are regular listeners, thanks so much for tuning in again. And I want to just remind those of you who are calling in, I'm hoping that you're practicing using the Emotion Roadmap in your life and it's making a difference for you. The whole concept of my show is to help you to manage your own emotions more effectively, to help you to take control of your emotions, to understand what your emotions are trying to tell you about, and to help you understand how to deal with them more effectively than maybe you are already on your own. We don't learn a lot about emotional control during our lifetimes, and it's really something that some of us really struggle quite a bit with. And I want to talk about a few things that people are finding very difficult in this day and age that are really important to understand better, and I'd like to help with that today. So I have a couple topics that I'd like to talk about, but I always like to start off the show telling you a little bit about what the show is about, because I know we have new listeners all the time tuning in to WPKN, and if you're driving by, you happen to have the radio on today, and you're listening for the first time to my show, again, I'm Chuck Wolf, and this is the Emotion Roadmap, Take the Wheel and Control How You Feel. I created some years ago this concept called an Emotion Roadmap. And what the concept is all about is helping people understand their feelings. It was Darwin who first discovered emotions as an evolutionary system that provided us with information about what's going on around us. So our emotions taught us to be afraid when we needed to fear something. They taught us to be angry when there was an injustice. They taught us to be sad when there's a loss. So we learn a lot from our emotions if we pay attention to them. But we don't really learn how to deal with them effectively. Sometimes we learn from our parents, sometimes we learn from books or readings that we do, sometimes we learn in schools, sometimes from coaches, sometimes from people in religious parts of our lives. There's a lot of places where we might learn something about dealing with our emotions, but it's not coherent or consistent necessarily, although there are efforts to change that. And I've been lucky enough to work with the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence to help with schools and helping them to define curriculum that teach kids how to deal with their anger, how to deal with your feelings if you happen to be humiliated or embarrassed or ashamed, how to deal with being enraged, how to deal with being sad, depressed, lonely, even how to manage your joy when joy is sometimes inappropriate given the context and the situation that you might find yourself in. So it's really important to understand what we can do with emotions, but one of the most important things I've learned in working with the pioneers in emotional intelligence is that you don't have to just stay with the feelings you have. Well, the feelings you have are informative. Sometimes they're not helpful. Sometimes sadness lingers too long. We experience a loss and we grieve, but we don't seem to ever get over it. How do we move ourselves past that? Sometimes we're angry, but we have no outlet for that anger. What do we do then? Or sometimes we're ashamed and we can't get past the feeling that we did something so bad, so embarrassing, that we can't let go, and it ruins our self-esteem. Well, if you have a situation that you're struggling with emotionally, and what I find is really smart people, when they're stuck, it's almost always because something emotional is happening either in them or in somebody they're dealing with. If that's the case, how do you get past that? How do you deal differently? What can you do to change how you feel? That's what the show's about. The show's about helping you change your feelings to feelings that are more ideal. One of the most striking innovations in the field of emotional intelligence in the last 20 years is this idea that we now understand that certain emotions are better for particular activities, trying to achieve certain tasks. We're better feeling one way rather than another. There are certain tasks that are best for detailed work, certain tasks best for brainstorming, certain tasks best for planning a wedding, for instance. Certain emotions best for planning a wedding. There's all these emotions that we feel and we experience, and they're often helpful, but not always. And when they're not helpful is when we get stuck. If we have a particularly difficult conversation coming up with someone and we're not certain how to approach that conversation because we're worried that it might escalate, that things might get worse instead of better. And yet we know we have to deal with it because we just have to. It's just in order to get done what we need to get done, we have to deal with it. Or maybe it's somebody you love and somebody in your family and you're watching them self-destruct and you're wondering, what can I say to change that behavior? Or some part of your family, another family member, is making a decision that you feel is just the wrong decision. And you can't let go of the fact that that's what they're going to do. And it's making it hard for you to get along with them, even though you love them. Or you're at work and you're struggling with another person who's got authority in the same area where you have authority, of overlapping authority. Happens a lot. And you don't agree on how to proceed. How do you have that conversation and make things better? Well, this show's all about helping you understand the underlying emotions at play that cause smart people to get stuck. And if you're one of those smart people who listens to WPKN, and there's a whole bunch of you out there, really smart people that listen to this show and to other programmers on WPKN, and you're stuck, then give me a call. And the reason I say give me a call is because the way the emotion roadmap works is I help you understand that when I first listen to you, I ask you for a little bit of context. Tell me your situation. Is it a peer at work? Is it a leader that you're struggling with? Are you a leader and struggling with somebody who works for you? Are you somebody at home who's having a difficult time with an aging parent, with a rebellious child, with a spouse that you just can't seem to get along with right now? If you're one of those people who's having a difficult time and you want to see if I can be helpful to you, give me a call, because when you call, I walk you through this emotion roadmap. I ask you about your situation. I ask you how you're feeling, and whoever else is key to what you're trying to get done, how is he or she or they feeling? And then I ask you, what would be ideal to feel if you could make magic happen and you wanted to change how you were feeling and how anyone else that was key was feeling? First, what would you want to change those feelings to? What would be ideal to feel? And that's based on the science of what feelings make the most sense for what you're trying to get done. And if they're not the feelings you're having, how do you change them? That's understanding how emotions work, and then managing it is finding a strategy that you can implement. So if you call in feeling somewhat helpless, I'm going to help you by the end of the phone call feel hopeful, like you got a plan that works. That's what the show's about. So if you've got something going on and you've wanted to talk to me, I'm on the first and second Wednesdays of the month. Give me a call at 203-336-9756. 203-336-9756. I'll give you a minute in case you got something you wanted to call about. Again, this is Chuck Wolf. This is the Emotion Roadmap. Take the wheel and control how you feel. And you're listening to WPKN 89.5 FM and streaming at WPKN.org. So there's nobody burning up the phone lines trying to call right now with something on their mind. Although I'm guessing that all of you that listen are thinking about, do I have something that's worth calling about? And I would say I've got about 45 minutes left. And if you got something, the beauty of me helping you, if I can help you, and I often do, is everybody else gets to listen. And I got a first caller. Hi, this is Chuck. You're on the air. Who am I talking to, please?
Hi, yes. My name is Purnima Agarwal.
I'm sorry, what was your first name?
It's Purnima. You could say Nima.
Nima, okay, thanks.
It's a mouthful.
Thanks, Nima. How can I help you today?
So I heard you mention Yale having the Emotional Intelligence Center, and I've been going to a therapist focusing on CBT.
That's cognitive behavioral therapy?
Right.
Okay.
And I do think a lot about emotions, and I've been thinking a lot about how I'm just getting away from the radio because I can hear it echoing. How, we focus so much on cognition, and I was surprised, how long it took for an emotional intelligence center to come up, because you're right, it is something we're not taught. And with relationships for me right now, it's with my partner, my husband, who I've been married to for 18 years, and we're in a phase of separating and getting divorced, and I had been reading about communication and how complicated that is. You take in gender, you take in ethnic backgrounds. I'm of Indian origin, he's Italian-Irish, and everything that goes with it. But emotions is something I've learned, as one therapist said to me, you can't rationalize them. And that's something I've always tried doing, and I do struggle with it because I'm struggling with my husband and regulating my emotions. And, I think, as you said, it is something we're not taught. And for me, it's incredibly challenging when to honor it and know it's there for a reason. But when, let's say, your childhood comes into play, or things that I used to take lightly but realize that I can't dismiss them or be so self-critical. And I'm sorry, I'm talking too much. I'd like you to respond or ask questions.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to think what question to ask because I'm listening to you, Nima. So, because partly what you're saying is you're sort of describing a context and a situation you find yourself in, and what I heard you say is you're really interested in understanding more about emotions, and that one therapist at least told you that you can't rationalize your emotions. I would say that, well, I agree with your therapist that you can't. I'm sure within the context that made sense. But I also want to say that you can understand emotions better, though. Mm-hmm. So it's not the same as rationalizing them. So the idea of trying to understand what's happening to us emotionally is really important. Now, one of the things that happens, you called in and you said that you're pleased to hear about the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. I am too. And in part, for a lot of years, we've tried to teach values and morals, and sort of as a sideline in schools. But more recently, when there's a couple of scientists. One is the president of Yale, Peter Salovey, and his colleague, Jack Mayer at the University of New Hampshire, a psychology professor. They actually created this, but discovered this idea that we have emotional intelligence abilities. And just like we have mathematical abilities and verbal abilities and spatial abilities and so forth, things that we typically measure in our cognitive intellectual quotient or IQ, those kinds of things exist. And what they said was, we also have emotional abilities to be able to perceive what others are feeling and what we're feeling ourselves, to be able to use emotions to create the kind of thoughts and actions we want, and to understand how emotions work, and also to be able to manage emotions. And all of us are different in those abilities, and those differences matter. So one of the things that maybe you're discovering is that, I don't know why you and your husband are divorcing at this point. There's all kinds of difficulties in any relationship that can emerge. And then, sometimes, hopefully, if you're lucky, you get to work through those, and you keep working through those, and you understand how important it is to really work at a relationship, and not just once you're married, just, okay, I'm married, I don't have to think about her or him anymore. In the same way.
Also, I've been reading a lot about, Elaine de Botton has done a lot of work in that field, and I think, he wrote an article in 2016, Why You'll Marry the Wrong Person, and it was the most read article in the New York Times that year. And I don't think it's so much marrying the wrong person, but having different conditioning. And emotions does come into this. And he talks about how it is one of the most difficult relationships, but you do need to have systems in place. And I fully agree with you. When I came across a psychologist who actually changed my life and helped me understand myself better and realize, exactly like you were saying, emotions can have great value. And I was always told as a child I'm too sensitive, too hypersensitive, too emotional. So it became a very negative word, as it does for a lot of people. But when I read Dabrowski and his theory of positive disintegration, I saw the value in it, and how that can be used to such a positive purpose. And when you were saying about my husband, I do love him dearly, and I'm pretty sure we will maintain a friendship. But what it came down to is, and it's not any fault of his own either, because DNA does come into play, or one's background. And he, for work, actually is a licensed clinical social worker, and I've been asking him to go to therapy because emotions have been a big part of it. My being too emotional, his inability, it took me a long time to realize, express emotions. And he is a licensed clinical social worker. And then I came across a book, Living with the Passive-Aggressive Male, either in the home or the boardroom, and he had to do this work activity. I didn't think they still did the Myers-Briggs test, but they did at his workplace, because it helps them understand who works well together, et cetera, and he scored very low on feeling and emotions. And I realized, that's hardwired in him, and that was one of the big problems in the relationship where I was on the other extreme. But, what you were saying about the emotions and the value that they have, that is something that's, we don't talk about that in society, and we tend to put up a face, right? Like if we feel like crying, we'll, hide or,
Well, let me say a couple things to you, because you don't have a specific instance of something to help with, but I want to give you some general thoughts, because I know you're interested in learning more about how to deal with this emotional stuff, and even maybe in terms of your ongoing relationship with your husband, just to understand him a bit better. I think I can be helpful in that way.
Regulating my emotions, because this is a very trying period to go through, and I was just lying on the couch and happened to put on the show. And you mentioned that, regulating emotions. And I thought, I really don't know how to do that.
Oh, okay. Let me give you a little bit of help with it. So one of the things I was asked to do recently, and this was actually quite an honor, actually. I was asked to write a chapter. There's this a book being put out by Duquesne University. It's going to be a professional desk reference for coaches, people that coach people. And coaching and therapy, I used to be a therapist, and as a coach in my professional practice, I often, the skills sometimes are similar, and it's just a question of how deep you go often. And one of the things that I've discovered, they asked me to write a chapter about the role of emotions in coaching. And so I want to just talk to you a little bit about what I wrote about, and just and talk to you about that as a way for you to think about emotions, how you feel, and also about your husband's feelings. So the premise is that if you want to change a behavior, you said you're sometimes too sensitive, or your husband doesn't seem to really want to deal with feelings, which is, by the way, it's very interesting how therapists, social workers seem to be attracted to a field where they struggle, because sometimes you become passionate about what you know you struggle with yourself, and you feel like if you're going to teach about it or help others, somehow you'll be learning things that will be helpful to you too.
Well, I always looked to him as an authority figure in that area. And then when he took that Myers-Briggs test just a couple of months ago, he said he got zero on feeling. And I said, that's impossible. I know you have feeling and sensitivity, but I learned from his sister that, you know, the brothers in the family, they all have a very hard time expressing themselves emotionally and talking about feelings. They don't. And I, being so concrete and cognitive in my thinking, but I do have this hypersensitivity and this artistic, creative temperament. You know, it helped me learn, but, you know, she said it goes back to childhood and to their father, and it took me being out of the relationship to realize, you know, he can talk about so many things and so articulate, but bring up emotions, bring up feelings, he shuts down.
So here's a way to deal with your own emotions and his, I think.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I've discovered over all these years of doing work, either as a therapist or as a coach, is that if you want to change a behavior, behaviors are influenced by the self-talk, the things we say to it. In other words, if we see ourselves being hypersensitive, you know, somewhere, an action, if you've been doing cognitive behavior therapy, you've heard things like this, where an action happens and you have a belief about that action, and that belief influences how you feel, which for you, often you hear something and you become overly sensitive to it. But it's not just because somebody said something or something happened, it's how you're interpreting what that meant.
Yes.
And so if you understand that the self-talk is coming deeper inside you, it's kind of like peeling back an onion. The self-talk in part is coming from your feelings. And your feelings somewhere in your history, Nima, is you felt somewhat inadequate, at least a bit, in terms of something that happened to you when you felt like you needed to react the way you've done over the years, which is to be more sensitive perhaps than you might want to be.
Absolutely.
So having said that, you want to understand, as soon as something makes you feel hypersensitive, and this is a good way to do this, is you want to journal what it is that just happened. And when you're in a calmer state, kind of step back and say, what did I say to myself when this happened? And what feelings are causing that? In other words, you can't just change your thoughts without understanding what feelings are driving those thoughts. So if there's a feeling of inadequacy or somehow some message that got coded into you when you were younger, if you can learn to just like listen to that message from when you were a little kid and replay it, and if it doesn't make sense today, if that message that you're giving yourself doesn't make sense today, then you want to react differently. You want to have a different feeling. And if you recognize patterns, because if you start journaling this stuff, you start having you start seeing themes. And if you recognize that something happens and it triggers a typical emotion for you in the past that you've experienced, which is hypersensitive, if that's what's going on, and you recognize that when something happens or is said, and you start to feel that hypersensitivity, you decide. This is the idea of a roadmap. You decide not to go down that path anymore. You know where it's going, and it doesn't lead to any place good for you.
Right.
And so you recognize, and one of the ways I like to think about this is, the more it happens, the more opportunity you have to practice. So it's not a bad thing if it happens, because now you've got a chance to practice. Okay, instead of going this way with how I'm feeling, which never ends well for me, I just heard that. I know that's a message coded in me, embedded in me years ago when I was a kid. It doesn't really resonate anymore, and it doesn't even make any sense. And so I'm going to feel differently about that. I'm going to feel as though, hey, this is a feeling about... almost a humorous feeling that, I'm feeling that way like I'm a little kid again. I'm not. So the self-talk changes. I'm not. I'm feeling like an adult. I'm feeling capable. and competent and lovable and somebody who is really able to deal with whatever comes. And when you start giving yourself that kind of message, instead of the message you get that causes you to feel the hypersensitivity, things will start to change for you.
And I think also sometimes we use the term hypersensitivity, but, as Dabrowski was explaining, those hypersensitivities are very positive emotions, but sometimes living in a capitalist society, and we know, as children, we show all kinds of emotions, but then over the years we learn to tamp them down at the detriment, I think, of society at large, and the individual pays a price for it. And that is something I think about a lot now. But yes, what you're saying about recognizing the patterns, and I think that was very helpful. One of the things I do say to Peter sometimes when we're in that stuck dynamic, I will say, I'm not going to go down that path anymore. That doesn't get us anywhere. Things just get us in a worse place.
Well, let me give you a different path that I'd like you to think about not going down to. So you, in your response to me, you went down and you started to bring in a much bigger picture about how society impacts all of that, which is something you're really interested in. I can see that you're a curious person and want to know more about how it all fits together.
I want to understand, right? And I want, anyways, yes, I am.
well, let me suggest this, at least for a month maybe. Stop thinking about that. And be very selfish about just thinking about how am I feeling. Forget about the outside context. Just focus on your feelings and how to change them. Because as soon as you start going to a bigger picture, you kind of let go of your accountability and responsibility for yourself.
Right. Well, I am holding myself accountable, but with those emotions, like let's say you're feeling really sad, and, divorce is like a grief, as my therapist was saying, and I am going through, anyways, put on a new medication because I had been on the wrong one, and so I was having a hard time dealing with things. And, so with the emotions, when you're like overwhelmed with that feeling of grief, or when you can only work on yourself, work on your feelings, even if someone's being passive-aggressive, how to regulate your own emotions. So I sometimes think of it as like having a toolbox. So in that moment, if you're overwhelmed by it and it's not a healthy being sensitive feeling, and I'm speaking for myself, and I know, okay, I'm overreacting. This is something, and I loved how you put this, and it was embedded in me as a child, but now realizing, okay, that's happening. What can I do? Should I listen to music? Should I go for a drive? Should I just journal maybe? Because there's that balance between honoring that feeling and wanting to escape it, to not let it consume you because it brings so much pain and suffering. And for me, pain and suffering, there's always a flip side to the coin. There's always instructions and lessons to be learned. And so a lot of what's been happening I do see as a gift for me to reflect on that and to look at myself and how I've been conditioned and what I need to work on regarding my emotions and feelings and my reaction to others as well.
Well, let me give you a concrete tactic that I learned a lot of years ago. There was a fellow that I was very friendly with for a time who was really a brilliant leader, facilitator, workshop leader. But he was great around relationships. And one of the things that he had discovered was this idea that people deal with these messages, and he had an acronym. It was IALAC, IALAC, and it stood for I am lonely and confused. And he said, what you want to do is you want to replace that with I am lovable and capable. And I think that might be helpful to you. I'm just listening to you. I think as you struggle with, those reactions, again, I would would journal them. If you're comfortable with journaling, or at least try to remember them some way, and just see if you can see what that coding was about. If you like that idea, try and investigate a little deeper into yourself. And every time you come up against that message where you're going to feel like I'm lonely and confused when that's happening to you, and you replace it with I'm lovable and capable, then I can tell you that at some point, it won't happen for a while, instead of divorce feeling like a grave, it's going to feel like an adventure. Because it's the next chapter in your life.
Well, I keep saying that, and I do feel that. I do feel more hopeful, and I am very fortunate. I have a loving, supportive family. I know I'm loving, but I also know I, am I'm opinionated at times, and I can learn how to express that better. But yeah, and the capable part, under the surface, yes, it's there. I look back at my childhood. I excelled in academics, but then I did have issues with mood swings, and we do need to destigmatize it in society. So bipolar, which is 100% bioneurological, all the evidence is there. Kay Redfield Jameson's written lots about it and teaches at Johns Hopkins University. But when you're dealing with that, and if it's untreated or on the wrong meds, it does, when you're healthier, or I pause rationally, I know I'm capable, but then there is that huge challenge to work with that affects your self-esteem.
As smart as you are, Nima, let me just cut in and just say, as smart as you are, you've got answers from lots of different places, and the answer you need most is the one that you're going to develop on your own.
Yeah, and that's something I needed to hear, which I never hear. And journaling is something I've read, long time ago. I tried. I've never been good about sticking to things, but I will definitely keep that IAIC in mind.
I am lovable and capable instead of I am lonely and confused.
Yeah, but just journaling, as you said, recognizing the patterns, and as you began, what just happened? What did I say to myself? What feeling is driving it?
And instead of the feeling that's driving it, what feeling do I want to put in there instead?
Yeah.
And that's the one where I'm saying, I think it's going to come up lovable and capable, I'm pretty sure, for you.
No, it is, and I know that, and I know it will be more hopeful, and it's getting through it. And I think for me, one of my biggest struggles is, one, to just sit with the emotion and feeling and let it be there. And when I sometimes tend, and I know one would say to escape, I think I'm a little self-critical at times, but let's say going to the beach or the movies or meeting up with someone, I know those are healthy activities, but I think what I'm not doing is what you've really hit upon, is writing it down on paper and asking myself those questions, because I will say what just happened, and I will replay the dialogue, and because I'm so concrete and direct, which is a problem sometimes, because for the first time I'm realizing I am a bit naive. I am very trusting. I feel I have a lot of love to give. But, I try to play both sides out, but then I don't think about what feeling is driving it. And I don't think about that encoded message, right? Something now I'm taking seriously. Instead, I reprimand myself, why am I being so emotional? Why can I not be more mature? I understand what's happening at the rational level, but I can't control it. And what you said, what's embedded, I'm finally starting to read about that is very important, because it becomes a fabric of who we are, but it's kind of deeply buried until you really start peeling away the layers like an onion to get to that.
Exactly.
And then to say, I know that, that how I acted was actually okay, or that why am I trying to be act a certain way instead of honoring that emotion and looking at how to get to the point where knowing I'm capable, not letting the lack of self-esteem that, has built up either because of the illness or because of marching to a different drum and, struggling with being my authentic self. But, yeah, kind of on a different path than a lot of people, and that is okay. And I'm going off on a tangent, and I apologize.
No, you're trying to put a lot of pieces together. It's a big puzzle in all of our human behaviors. But the way let me wrap up with this, because I want to just say in closing, I want to just point out a couple of things to you. You've got a lot of the pieces, and that's why I say, when you keep going back out to who said and who read and what I learned, and just say, as soon as you think that, just think, well, how does that impact me? And just let go of the rest of it, and just how does that inform the strategy I want for myself. You already understand. It's not running away from your feelings. If you're feeling sad or depressed and listening to music takes you out of that, that's just being smart. That's not running away from something. But if you find yourself feeling like a lot of times with certain things that happen a certain way that makes you very uncomfortable, and that's the kind of themes I was talking about that don't end well, that isn't just about you doing another activity and not paying attention to that. Your emotions are telling you something important. But they're not necessarily being helpful at this point because they're just playing an old message. It's kind of like a recording from the past that you just keep hearing over and over and over again.
Yes.
And when you catch some of that happening, if that's happening, then you want to understand that the way you change that behavior is you understand what's the things I'm saying to myself when something triggers it, and the automatic words that pop up in my head, what are those, and what feelings drive that, and how do I change those feelings to something better for me? So I'm feeling that's the lovable and capable part. It's sort of like it's sort of like a little process flow where you have emotions that drive thoughts, and those thoughts create behaviors. And if behaviors are ones you don't want, you got to understand, what are the words I'm saying and what feelings are causing me to say those words to myself, and how do I change those feelings to something different?
Yeah. I thank you so very much.
All right, let me give you one last thing for your husband.
Yeah.
And that is, first of all, as much as you want to understand what I just told you about yourself, sometimes the way we want to think about other people is our only frame of reference is ourselves and how our feelings work. Your husband's feelings work differently. He's had different messages growing up. Now, he's tried by becoming a social worker to deal with it in his own way. But I can tell you that one of the things I've learned over my lifetime is that not everybody can talk about feelings comfortably, and that they may never. And so if I want to know how they're feeling, I don't ask them how they're feeling anymore. I ask them, what do you think? And when you ask somebody, what do you think, you hear how they feel.
Yeah.
So just something you might...
That's very true. And with my husband also, this is, again, 18 years, because I think I'm so concrete and direct, and when he mentioned he had given contextual cues, one, I probably never picked on them, and two, when you're going back and forth and in that dynamic, it's hard to be objective. But I have to say that book, Living With, it mentions male, because I think society has a lot to do with it, because up until very recently, everything was, for the most part, designed by men for men, which I heard on NPR. I missed that talk, but that line. And so I do feel compassion for him also, because as you were saying, as I was reading that book, Living with Someone Who's Passive-Aggressive, it really helped me understand, because for certain things that kept coming up over and over again, and they were verbatim said in that book, but they say that personality for that passive-aggressive individual, which we all have, and I know I have some of it too, but some have it more, it's usually crystallized by the end of adolescence. And that's one thing I realized, I was going, whatever the saying is, I apologize, the wrong tree, because...
Oh, barking up the wrong tree? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
I think with my Indian background, I struggle with some of those things. But, so that is allowing me to understand him as well. But I realized, as you said, it is about how do you rephrase it, right? So in the past, I would be very direct, and that didn't work, and he's definitely not list-oriented, so I would try, I'm very system solution-based, and I've learned during this period not everything needs to be solved, not everything has to have different alternatives and solutions. It could be just actions, and, it'll help me in the future with other relationships.
Right.
So, that learning, I feel, gosh, I wish I had this earlier, but, better late than never. But,
Right.
It does help me understand him. And then it's exactly like you said, not to ask those questions about feelings or go on about,
Yeah.
please express yourself. Or I would even ask him, please tell me, how can I support you? I know you're overwhelmed, and he wasn't able to do that. And now I'm realizing, some people, not because he's being mean or doing it intentionally, it's just not the way he's hardwired, and it's difficult for him. So asking questions.
Well, the people
critical.
that really get how this roadmap works begin to understand that even if you're dealing, now this is your husband, but really anyone else, if you see a behavior that you don't really understand quite why it's the way it is, ask yourself, what might he be saying to himself for self-talk, and what feelings is he having that's causing that? And that's a way to try and understand how you might deal differently with them too.
Yeah. Well, I thank you very much.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for the call, Nima.
So much valuable information.
I wish you the best with it. Thanks for listening, and thanks for calling.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye. Okay, that was interesting. So hopefully everybody's learned a little bit, though, as you're listening. I really appreciate Nima calling in, because hopefully when you listen to somebody else's situation, you understand for yourself what the strategies are that might be helpful. And this idea of trying to understand where behavior comes from, particularly unwanted behaviors, on your part or on somebody else's part that you're dealing with. If you stop and ask yourself, what are they saying to themselves that's causing them to act that way? And what might they be feeling that would cause those kind of thoughts that create those kind of behaviors? It's a really interesting way to think about how to deal with relationships and how to deal with yourself as well. Well, I did want to talk about a couple other things today, so let me just share with you a couple of thoughts. One is this idea of free-range children. Now, you might have thought I was going to say free-range chickens, because that's the reference that I had. But there was actually something on NPR as well I was listening to. But also I read about this too. This idea of free-range children is about some author's concept that, you know what, many years ago, somehow we got away from letting our kids just go outside and play. And we did it to be protective, because we heard all kinds of stories, with the kind of media we have now, where, if something horrible happens to someone, we know about it instantly, and it's replayed over and over and over again if it's a really horrible thing. And it scares us. And as, parents that care about our children, we're frightened by it. My daughter has a couple of kids, and I remember she told me that she let her son, he was outside playing in the yard, and a neighbor stopped and knocked on her door and said, "Do you know your son's outside?" As if that was like something unheard of. And I remember when I was growing up, and I'm old, relatively speaking, compared to many people probably listening, but I remember growing up, I used to love going outside and just playing with everybody on the street. Everybody kind of got together, and if we had enough for a team, we'd play baseball, we'd play catch, we'd play hopscotch, we'd jump rope, just lots of different things. And was like, that was normal. Now we've got people with their kids programmed into lots of things so that they have activities. But many of the kids oftentimes are just staying home and just doing stuff with their smartphones or their iPads. Yeah, so we've got people on screen time. And that's another concern. And one of the things that is related to all of this is the high number of suicide rates among children. I mean, it's really high for young girls and young boys. And it's really sad. And so one of the things I thought I'd ask people about is just, if you had some thoughts about this, what are your ideas for doing things differently? Because I think that when children were encouraged, my mom used to say to me, well, on Saturdays in particular, I used to like to watch Westerns. There were a lot of Westerns on. I used to like that a lot. And she'd throw me out of the house at 10 o'clock in the morning. She'd say, "Chuck, go out and play. Get out and play." And I'd go outside. I'd be a little reluctant. And then I'd go outside and have a ball and didn't want to come in until I had to. So the idea of going out and just finding other people to play with was a way of building relationships. It was a way of learning how to get along with others, and it built a level of sociability that doesn't come automatically anymore. Those experiences don't happen so much the way we raise our children these days. And by the way, I'm not saying anything we're doing relative to screen time is a bad thing, because let's face it, that's the future. The kids growing up today, different even than millennials. The kids today, and there's new names for the next generation, but they're attached to their phones, their smartphones. I mean, look at how young kids are that are playing with phones. 3-year-olds are playing with phones and, smartphones. And so you've got this change in what's happening in society. And this is really, it isn't just America. This is lots of places around the world where people are engaged in ways with technology that are very different, extremely different. And what I'm wondering is, do you have some thoughts about how to help children be better at relating to others, to have better relationships? I was reading kids don't date so much anymore. They don't even talk on the phone. It's so much about just texting. And I think we've lost some of the ability to relate to one another as a result of that. We've also lost some of the ability to be in charge of ourselves, because when we go out and we have to go out and play on our own on the street without some instructor telling us where to line up and how to make a catch or how to get along or whatever it might be, we don't have that. That's why I think we have safe spaces now in colleges and universities where if something politically happens that is unnerving, we don't make people take their test in schools because we think this was too emotionally upsetting. And that's troubling to me, and maybe to you as well. When did we stop being actually lovable and capable ourselves? When did that happen? And is it all about our inability to relate to one another because of the lack of opportunity for just freely engaging with others without structured programming? Getting children out of the house and onto the streets and into neighborhoods where they can engage with others. I don't necessarily have answers for that, folks. I'm kind of curious to know what you think about it. And so I thought I'd raise it. This idea of free-range children was that, we've taken, like the chickens, and put them in little cages and protected them so that they would be the most saleable at the end of their lives. But I don't think that's helpful for kids. And so the idea of free-range chickens makes some of us want to buy those chickens that are out running around eating seed wherever they find it, and kind of trying to get along with the other chickens and with the rooster maybe that's in the farmyard. But what about kids trying to experience how to deal with tough kids, with bullies, just on their own? What about kids trying to get over an argument so that the next time they see each other, they want to play together again? Learn how to do that on their own. I'm not saying guidance isn't good. In fact, I'm a big fan of helping people learn how to deal with different events in their lives. Obviously, that's why I do the show. But this is tricky for me because part of this is this idea of free range really jumped out at me. And I wonder what you think. If you got some thoughts about that, give me a call. 203-336-9756. I've just got a few minutes, so if somebody's got something they want to ask me about, why don't you call about that? Or if you got an idea about free-range children, give me a call. 203-336-9756, and I'll give you a minute. So the topic is free-range children, how to create more of them, how to help kids to have relationships, to feel good about themselves, how to get kids off their screens at least some of the time, or what to encourage them to do while they're on their screens, because those screens aren't going away. We know that, right? It's only going to be more and more technology in our lives. And so rather than fight against progress and technology, just how do we make it work for us the best way we can? At the same time, we're building relationships and self-esteem along the way. One of the things, one of my daughters is a special education teacher, and she is just signed on to do a self-esteem building after-school class for young girls. And since she's a special needs teacher, I said, Jen, one of the things you might do is, whatever lessons you have, bring it in for your boys too. Because school is one of those places where self-esteem can get eroded pretty quickly if you're not good at it. Now, if you're good at it, it's great because your self-esteem goes way up. Same thing with sports and so forth when you're good at something. But everybody isn't good. And so how do you deal with your esteem levels if you're not good? How do you feel good about yourself when you're not really competitive at certain things. Maybe school's one of them. There's a lot that goes into why people might choose suicide. There's all kinds of multiple pieces to the puzzle of human behavior that I've come to learn about. And again, I'm just curious if anybody has any thoughts about how do we encourage our children to take more responsibility for themselves, to encourage them to talk with people on the phone, in person, to go outside, go outdoors, knock on somebody's door and say, "We want to come out and play?" How do we do more of that? So again, 203-336-9756. I'm going to have to go in a few minutes, so if I don't get a call in a minute, I'll just tell you about one other thing that I wanted to share with you today. Maybe it'll be a topic for next week. I'm back here next week. Okay, here's the other topic. The other topic is, what does it mean when you're getting really effective development at work? It's another conversation I would like to have with people, because I find sometimes that the idea of employee development or leadership development, again, I've been a leadership consultant for a lot of years, and that's kind of my background, and I used to be a family therapist. That's why I'm kind of able to talk about a lot of different things. And I've worked with lots of different organizations, and I do have a caller. Just a sec. Hi, this is Chuck. You're on the air. Who am I talking to?
Hi, this is Ann.
Hi, Ann. How you doing?
Oh, okay. Just the subject of what makes people, we have to remind children that the future is so much larger than the present. I went through a kind of a classic teenage angst phase, and fortunately, I was aware enough that I just knew things would get better if I could just get through high school. I wished I could sleep for the next 2 years to just get past that, and then get to find what I was actually good at in life.
Interesting.
So, we have to remind people of that, and whether you love any characters like Oprah Winfrey or Martha Stewart or the Apple guy, I believe it was,
Steve Jobs. Steve
all
Jobs
failed over and over and over.
Okay, yep.
And then they, obviously they turned it around pretty spectacularly. J.K. Rowling failed over and over.
Walt Disney was another one. Lucille Ball was another one. Yeah, lots of very famous people had lots of failures in their life, right?
We have this funny situation in school where by first grade they're expected to manage their homework, their snacks, their lunches, their jackets, their every single thing. We expect them to manage all by themselves, and they're in the exact same position in high school. They get they're not allowed to drive by themselves until they're 18.
That's changed,
so we
right?
We have them in virtually the exact same position for 12 years, and it builds a lot of frustration and imbalance, I think, in their growth of their independent skills. So we have to just try to encourage, part-time jobs and social groups and stuff where they can flex their outside of school muscles and learn how to be independent and learn that there's something in life past school.
Well, you make a lot of interesting comments, Annie, and I'm almost out of time, but it's one of those topics that I think, there isn't a lot of information out there about, but I do think, again, some of the concern is this idea of safe spaces. We need them. It just seems kind of crazy to me. The fact that kids don't play just on the streets anymore, that someone would go over and knock on my daughter's door and say, "Do you know your son's outside by himself?" It's like, somehow we've changed a lot. So, but we live in a different kind of world. The world keeps evolving, and I think however we're going to deal with those kinds of changes, it's just maybe useful to have a thoughtful conversation. You think it's worth talking about next week? I mean, you called in about it.
Yeah, it's maybe what's happened to me over and over is that I wasn't in position to call you. You mentioned something that I was like, ooh, love to talk about that, love to call, but I'm driving. So
Yeah. Right. Well, I'm glad you've tuned in, and
deep subject.
I really
A very
appreciate.
important one.
Thank you so much, Ann. Thanks for the call. I'm going to have to sign off now. I think Richard Epstein's coming in next, so take care, everybody.
Okay, thank
Take
you.
care.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye now. Well, thanks, everybody, for listening. This has been Chuck Wolf. You've been listening to the Emotion Roadmap. Take the wheel and control how you feel. And I'll be back next week, and I look forward to talking to you then.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.